So first up, we have the privilege of hearing from Lauren, not the Lauren you probably all know, who's awesome, but we have a guest speaker. Lauren, you can come up. Lauren is a vice principal of a school for autism. It's called Little Leaps, that's correct, Little Leaps School. Apparently, I don't know her, but I know from a very reliable source that she's awesome, and she's going to give us a great bunch of info, and we're going to learn and we're going to grow. And then there will be time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, write them down. Don't forget them. Jason, at the end. So write down your questions so at the end you can bring your questions. Over to you.
Okay, morning everybody. Sorry, I only have 20 minutes, so this should be interesting. I've got a lot of information to get through, so let's see how far we get. Okay, I'm going to show you some pictures and stuff I've printed out, so I don't know if all of you will be able to see it as I explain. Okay, so let me start off with saying I give a training called Autism 101 to our parents that are new parents. I always explain autism before I explain the actual diagnosis and everything. You need to think of it as a bookshelf, okay? Everybody has the same books, so everyone is born with the same books on a bookshelf. But some of the kids have got one book removed and some have got 10 books removed. So for example, you'll have a child on the spectrum who's got good language, so obviously they only have one book out of their language section taken out, and you have a child that's got no language at all, so obviously 9 out of 10 of their books are missing. So that's how I always try and explain to parents how to think about autism and how it's a spectrum. Okay, so autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, it's named for a group of pervasive developmental disorders impacting the neurological development of a child. So there are 5 different disorders that they speak about. So you get classic autism, Asperger's syndrome, Rett syndrome, childhood degenerative disorder, and then our PDD-NOS. Okay, so classic autism, this is the one that most of the children are diagnosed with. They had to meet the criteria for 3, it's a very rigid criteria, and they need to meet it for 3 deficits. So they have deficits in their social development, in their language development, and they have repetitive stereotypical behaviors. Our second kind of autism is Asperger's syndrome. It's a much milder form of autism. The main difference between classic autism and Asperger's syndrome is the social development. So a lot of the time, the children that are Asperger's have normal development with language, but they have severe social deficits. This is also usually only diagnosed at age of 6 or 7, because that's when it's most noticeable, is obviously at school-going age where they need to interact more with children. Then our third one I'll discuss is our PDD-NOS. So basically, these are all your children that meet criteria for classic autism, for Asperger's, for Rett, but they don't meet it so rigidly that they can be diagnosed with that specific disorder. So they're placed in a completely different group, which is PDD-NOS. So like I say, most of the time, we actually deal with children that have classic autism. Thank you. Okay, so how is autism diagnosed? Autism is diagnosed using our diagnostic manual. A neurologist, psychiatrist, or pediatric neurologist observe the child for a period of time and obviously observe specific behaviors which lead to a diagnosis. A lot of the time, the kids are referred to a neurologist by a speech therapist or an occupational therapist. Or obviously if a teacher says to them, listen here, I've seen these are red flags, I've figured out, you need to go and see a neurologist. And that's usually how it's diagnosed. So like I say, they look for 3 impairments specifically: your social and emotional development, your language and communication, and then your repetitive stereotypical behaviors. So first I'm going to discuss the social and emotional. So these children have difficulties in social communication and social interaction with others across different situations. They have failure to initiate conversation or to respond appropriately to social interaction. So for example, if you're having a conversation, they'll just chip in because they don't understand one person needs to talk, then it's another person's turn to respond. And they don't initiate speech. So for example, if a child is eating a bowl of food and they need a spoon, they won't put up their hand up and say, can I have a spoon? They'll just sit there. That kind of thing. They don't initiate any speech or interaction. They have difficulties in social emotional reciprocity. They have reduced interest in sharing emotional affect and deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. They really struggle to form friendships, for example, because they don't understand what is a friendship about. They don't know how to interact with the other children. And like I say, they have difficulty in understanding their emotional side. So for example, if they push a child and they fall, they won't understand that that's not right because that child is going to be hurt, etc. They have difficulties in sharing imaginative play or in making friends, and there's an absence of interest in peers. They're quite happy to sit by themselves and play with toys for hours. They don't even feel the need to try and interact with other children. And you can see it immediately because a child is automatically interested in another child. They all want to be together and play, and the autistic child will actually exclude themselves and go to the other end of the room. So these are examples of some red flag behaviors when it comes to this. They can't form friendships. They don't understand how to play games, for example, stuck in the mud. They don't understand the rules of a game. They don't understand how to play sports because of rules, for example, soccer. They have trouble working in a group. They have difficulty with unstructured parts of the day, and they thrive on routine. Autistic kids thrive on routine. That's one thing that you need to remember. If there's any change to their routine, they have a meltdown. It depends on the age of the child. If they're able to calm themselves down, you're okay. But sometimes the younger children, once they have a meltdown, you've lost them for the entire day. It goes on. They can cry for hours. They don't even get tired. It goes on. And it's difficult to get them to calm down. They don't have the ability to self-soothe, to calm themselves down. So what we usually do is in the classroom, we'll have a picture up, and it explains every part of the day. So for example, now we're going to go to the toilet, then we're having lunch, then we're doing art, then we're doing math, so that they know what comes next, and we can warn them ahead of time. We've even had parents that have complained, they take the same route to school every day. If they drive a different route to school, when they get there, they're having a meltdown. What's wrong? Oh no, I took a different street than I did yesterday. So even things like that, it's unstructured. They don't know what to expect. So for them, they cannot handle that. That's a very important point to remember. They don't have an imagination. So, example, when it comes to fantasy play, you actually have to teach them how to, for example, dress up and pretend they're a doctor, dress up and pretend they're a mom. They don't understand that. They have difficulties with that. They have no empathy for others. Like I say, if I'm crying in my class, for example, a mainstream child might come and say, like, oh, what's wrong? My kids have no idea. They're just like, what is this woman doing here crying? So they don't understand it at all. They have no empathy. They cannot understand how you're feeling. They struggle to make generalizations. So for example, if I show them a picture of a grey cat, they'll think that's a cat, that a grey cat is a cat. So if they see an orange cat, they don't know that's a cat. They're like, that's not a cat, only a grey cat is a cat. They struggle to generalize. And then also one that's very obvious is lack of eye contact. So they struggle to read people's facial expressions. And because of that, they don't like to look in their eyes. It's like it becomes too overwhelming for them. So they rather look away. And they struggle, like I say, with something that's very important. It's called theory of mind. So theory of mind, I always explain to the parents, it's the ability to read and interpret the cues and context that indicate someone's feelings, thoughts, intentions, and beliefs. It's the ability to self-reflect and to perceive and think that one's own thoughts and to monitor, communicate, and manage their own emotions. So for example, I don't know if you guys can see, but can you see this picture of this man's eyes here? Is he happy, convinced, or anxious? So from his eyes, most people would say he's happy. An autistic child has no clue. I mean, if we can just look at eyes and read it, now imagine it's not only the eyes they have to deal with, it's the mouth, it's the forehead, it's just too overwhelming for them. And that's why I said they struggle with theory of mind, so they struggle to think of how someone else is feeling in a specific situation. This is also just something interesting I like to show parents, is there was an 8-year-old boy with Asperger's syndrome asked to draw a playground. This is his playground here. Okay, you can't see it, but it's literally just like a jungle gym. And then over here, this is his sister's drawing. And you can see the two differences between the drawings are the 6-year-old sister has got people in her drawings, and the 8-year-old autistic doesn't. He just has a playground, which shows you that their social is not important to them. So when a normal child thinks of, a mainstream child thinks of a playground, they automatically put people in it because that's where they associate playing with your friends, etc. Whereas a child on the spectrum won't. That's not important to them at all. Okay, language and communication. This is also a very important part. They have deficits in their verbal and non-verbal communicative behaviors, which are used for social interaction. So this is anything from poor verbal and non-verbal communication to abnormalities in their eye contact and body language, or deficits in understanding and the use of facial expressions and gestures. Some of the red flags there that we see is something called echolalia. So that's basically like a child repeats you like a parrot. So in class you'll have, I don't know, if I'm moaning at a child for being naughty and say, sit down, then you have someone, sit down. And it's like, write in your book, go to the toilet. It's like a parrot, basically. So they parrot fashion everything that you say. It's not spontaneous speech at all. So one good thing I always tell parents about echolalia is there's at least speech there. but it's not independent speech, so it's not like they can reply to a question or an initial conversation. But at least if there is speech there, it's something you can work with. They do not have a wide vocabulary at all, so their vocabulary is not on par with their age. They may have great receptive language, so a lot of our parents can understand you very well, but they've got no expressive language, so they can't speak back. So if I say, I can give them 10 instructions, throw this in the dustbin, get a glass of water, they can do all of it, but when they come to me and I ask, what is your name? They can't answer me. Or when is your birthday? How old are you? They can't answer me. They struggle to follow a number of verbal instructions given at one time. That's obviously with our younger children, they do struggle with that. They do not respond to his or her name. So a lot of parents think that when their kids are born, they're actually deaf. They think they're hard of hearing because they call them and they don't respond to their name at all. It's actually not that. They get the hearing tested, and I know before diagnosis is made, usually they have to take a hearing test with them, and it's just part of ASD. They do not understand jokes or sarcasm. So they don't understand jokes at all. So for example, if you look outside and you say, oh, it's raining cats and dogs, they'll all do this because they think like it's actually cats and dogs are going to start raining down. They take everything so literally and they don't understand sarcasm at all. They do not understand the social use of language or conversation, like I said earlier. And like I said, they take literal interpretation. They also cannot follow a point. So if you say, go and fetch the bag over there, they cannot follow your finger and go straight there. They automatically go this way, and you're like, no, there, follow my finger. It's very difficult for them to follow a point. When it comes to fantasy play, like I also said, they take everything so literally. There was a child in my class, they were dressing up, and she had like a wedding dress on, and she said to the little boy, okay, on Saturday we're going to get married. So he went home and he said to his mom, no, on Saturday they need to go to the grand's house. So she was like, okay, they went to the grand's house on Monday. She's like, did something happen on Friday at school? Then I realized this little girl has said they're getting married on Saturday. So he was like, we need to leave the area before she comes and finds me and we actually get married. Okay, so when it comes to our nonverbal children, so when I say nonverbal, I mean they've maybe got 10 words in their vocabulary. Like I say, usually the expressive language is really good, but they really struggle the receptive language is good, but they really struggle to express themselves. So we need to find a way for them to express themselves and show us that they understand something, or to communicate, because basic things like asking for a glass of water or food or telling their mom that you're hungry, they can't do. So we often use South African Sign Language, tiny hands, to communicate, especially with our younger kids. So things like toilet, that's the first thing we work on, and obviously like certain foods and stuff, and then we use it for like colors, shapes, numbers, animals, all of that. So this is just an example. I can't really see it that well, but here's an example of numbers. I would use the sign on the left there with the number, and the child would have to match it. If we do color by numbers, for example, number 2, you must color blue. This would be the color blue. So you can see how it just makes it more literal for them. And because autistic learners are visual, it really helps when they actually see the sign, your hand using the sign, they make that connection. A lot of them actually start speaking once you do that because they actually can see the connection from your hand to the spoken word. Okay, and then the last triad that they're diagnosed with is your repetitive or stereotypical behaviors. So this is restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. These behaviors include motor movements, use of speech, like they repeat lines from a TV advert, they line up toys, they spin objects, like I say, echolalia or flipping objects. I had a child that used to walk around and repeat adverts that he had seen on the TV for nappies, for example. So all day he used to walk around and say, Pampers, only $4.99 for 48 diapers. Like, he used to do that all day. And you can imagine how interrupted that is for him and the other kids. I mean, that's all he was doing all day. So if a child does not engage in such behaviors, they do become anxious, and these repetitive behaviors calm them down. So a lot of people call this stimming. So a lot of the time you'll see them do this out of the corner of their eye, or they do this, or some of them turn around, or some of them hit their chins like this. So although it looks strange, it's their way of coping with things. It brings their anxiety level down. So I always say to parents, I don't mind stimming, as long as they can still do the things they need to do in a day, because obviously it does help them. So examples of red flags would be OCD. A lot of them have got obsessive compulsive disorder. So the problem is, I teach the primary school age kids, they're so perfectionistic. So they'll erase something 10 times because they feel it's not good enough. It's the OCD, it needs to be perfect. Like I said, they thrive off routine, and any difference in the day can result in a meltdown. They taste, feel, tap surfaces. So we have kids, like at our gate, we've got a metal signboard. Every day if that gate is open, he runs out, he taps it, and he comes back in. He doesn't try and escape, but he needs to tap that board every single day. Spinning objects, a lot of them will sit for hours and just spin an object around and around. Watching door hinges, switching lights on or off, or closing doors. These are very disruptive behaviors. So these are ones that I would put a stop to, because I had a child in my class that couldn't work unless the door was closed. So every time someone came in or out, she was up closing the door. And eventually I left it open and I said, look, you're still going to be okay if the door is open, but you can't get up every 2 minutes. It's not going to help anybody. Lights on and off, a lot of them want the lights off, and then you can't see anything. So I'm like, no, you can't have the lights off. You need to be able to see your work. So like I said, I don't mind the repetitive behaviors, but they need to be functional. And then rocking and swinging are obviously very common. With autistic children, there's no sense of danger either. So when they swing on a swing, it's not just like a normal, it's a hectic swing, so they can feel that movement. And for some strange reason, they are quite safe. They don't actually really hurt themselves. They also like to climb at the top of jungle gyms and stand high up. They are actually fine. They seem to understand, that kind, like they're quite safe on there, although they don't understand safety necessarily. They're quite good climbers. So anyway, the fourth triad, which I believe needs to be actually included in the diagnosis, is our sensory sensitivity. So this is really important, because if this is not taken out of the classroom environment, for example, the child cannot learn anything at all. So it's not part of the diagnosis, but as a teacher, we see how important it is to deal with these issues. So autistic children have difficulties processing everyday sensory information. Because they find it difficult to process the information, they become anxious, and this results in the child presenting with challenging behaviors. So a child receives input from our 7 senses, so sight. So a lot of our kids will look out of the corner of their eyes, like lights, for example. They can't stand hectic lights, so they'll spend the whole lesson doing this. So even a dim light that wouldn't bother me at all, and like even these, they're quite bright, but I can put it past myself to actually carry on. They cannot. They just do this the whole time. And trying to get a child to concentrate on something they're doing while this light here, this one specific light, is bothering them, they cannot. They can't do that at all. It needs to be removed. Sound, a lot of the kids will block their ears. They can hear sounds a lot louder than we can, for example. So if you're mowing the lawn 3 streets down, they can probably hear the weed eater. We hear sound over and over again. We become habituated to the noise. In a child with autism, they do not become habituated. So like I say, if I start here and there's someone shouting there, I can put it out of my mind and I can carry on. They can't. For them, it's like amplified. It like draws their attention to it. I had a child that used to get his bag on his back, and he used to go stand at the gate. And I used to go look and say, no, but your mom is not here. Promise you 10 minutes later, his mom was there. He could hear her car from miles away. He knew she was coming. It's amazing. Their hearing is amazing. Also, like in class, if I have my aircon on, I can see the kids immediately that they can't handle. I mean, the aircon is on, you don't even hear it. But for them, it's just so loud. Smell, they can't stand certain smells, fruits and sweets, so a lot of the time, and also touch, they're quite tactile defensive, so a lot of our kids are picky eaters. It's not being naughty, they just physically cannot handle that texture in their mouths. So a lot of them, for example, with macaroni cheese, they just vomit. They cannot handle that smooth texture in their mouths. So it's difficult because some kids will only eat white food, so they eat dry rice, chicken nuggets, chips. Some kids can eat anything. That's why I say it's a spectrum. So some kids don't struggle with this, but the kids that are picky eaters, it's really challenging. With a smell, they also have a very strong sense of smell. So I had a child that hated sweets. He couldn't stand sweets. So his parents actually, they had a room in their house that they didn't want him to go into. They used to put like a sweet on top of the laptop, and he wouldn't even go in that room because of that smell. So it just shows you how strong that is. Then we have our balance, which is our vestibular system. So our kids really struggle with this. You see, I can see there's a step here. So when I come forward, I need to step down. Now, to an autistic child, this is a black hole. They can't see what this is. So now when they come to a step, they're like that. So, I mean, imagine everywhere you walk and you can't see that. I mean, that's very challenging. Body awareness, proprioceptive system. If the child closes their eyes, they don't know where their arms are, legs are, etc. So our children really struggle to understand where parts of their body are in space. So even if they draw man, for example, we have 9-year-olds that still draw potato men because they aren't aware of where their arms are in space, their bodies. And this makes it very difficult for them. Okay. I want to just discuss a little bit about meltdowns because it's very important. A child may be having a meltdown in an attempt to communicate that he or she is uncomfortable. When a child laughs for no reason or cries for no reason, he or she is trying to communicate. However, they are using the wrong means to do so. So children's behavior is response to the environment. So like I say, a meltdown is them trying to tell you, hang on, there's something wrong, you need to help me. But because they don't have the verbal ability to do it, they cry. Or we have kids that just laugh all day. all day, just all day, that's all they do. So it's abnormal. And it's trying to tell you they're anxious, there's something in the environment that's bothering them, you need to remove it. Much like a cup that gets too full, a child with ASD needs to be removed from a situation, placed in isolation to allow their cup to empty. Once their cups have emptied, they're then ready to receive more stimulation to fill their cup up again. That's how I always explain it to parents. So sensory stimuli need to be removed from it, allow them to chill for a while, and then integrate them back into the group. Just quickly, some autism myths. Autism is not caused by the MMR vaccine. Autism is not an emotional or psychological disorder, and children with autism are not naughty or undisciplined, they're just misunderstood. And there's no cure for autism, it is a lifelong disorder. Okay, then I just want to explain this quickly. I don't know if you guys can see it. So I always use this as an example to show people what I mean when I say it's a spectrum disorder. So you get diagnosed with autism and you're placed on a spectrum, okay? So I've just got different spectrums here. So on this side, it's the severe ASD. So for language, we have no verbal, or no language, and on slight ASD, thank you. Then on the slight ASD side, we've got very good language, expressive and receptive. For social, we've got little to no eye contact on this side, and here wants to play with other children. Behavior, we've got aggressive, self-harming, tantrums, and OCD. Then on this side, little to no obvious behaviors. Our sensory section, light sensitive, noise sensitive, textures, unusual interests, example, doors. And then here they can self-regulate and can cope with sensory stimuli. And then cognition, they're unmotivated, no attention, and then here they're eager to learn. So I always use an example called Mary. So I've put Mary on the spectrum. So in her language, she's very good in language-wise, but social, she's okay. Behavior is okay, but she's got major sensory issues, and cognitions also seem to be okay. So it just shows you how each child is placed on a spectrum, but they're all autistic. Not one autistic child is exactly the same. If you've met one autistic child, you've met one, and that's what's so difficult is experience is everything, because the more you work with them, the more you learn what needs to be done, adaptations you need to make. It's difficult if you've only worked with one autistic child, because that's not autism. They're so different, each and every single one of them. So that's why to try and place them on a spectrum is easier to try and see where they need the most help. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to just quickly discuss some of the inclusion strategies that we use. When we speak about inclusion, we talk about including learners with ASD to participate with other learners. So what the school needs to do then is obviously accommodate those learners in the classroom. So inclusion is basically taking a child and putting them in a mainstream environment, okay? Usually the kids that are able to do that are your highest functioning autism kids. Your classic autism children, there's no ways they'll cope in that kind of environment. Our children need more of a remedial class, at smaller classrooms with more one-on-one attention. So in an inclusive educational setting, learners with autism have equal opportunities to develop their social skills, communication skills, academic skills, positive behavior, and coping skills, which can't be replicated in the special needs setting. So I do understand where an inclusive education would be helpful, but as a teacher myself, it's not always the way forward. Okay, but some of the coping strategies you could use is you need to understand the individual strengths and needs. So to understand a learner's individual strengths, we obviously need to get to know the learner over time. So that's obviously from observing them and making notes, but also talking to their parents and seeing what their behaviors are like at home, just to understand the child better and to understand what shaped certain behaviors and stuff. We need to remember to recognize and extend the learner's individual strengths, as well as identifying their needs to ensure quality learning experiences. So a lot of the times, children with ASD are quite good in one area. So for example, maths, they get high marks, 90% for maths, but when it comes to the language side of things, they might only get 30 or 40%. So at the same time, even though they do well in maths, we still need to challenge them to reach their potential, but we need to also obviously focus on the areas that need more help. Creating a supportive learning environment. It is very important to create an autism-friendly environment because the physical environment of the learner has a very significant influence on the learner's ability and to learn and their behavior. So like I said earlier, if you don't take, for example, your sensory stimuli out of the classroom or remove them, you're not going to get anything out of them. So the first thing is arrange the physical environment. So for learners with autism, the physical structure needs to communicate boundaries and facilitate engagement. The placement of furniture should minimize impact of traffic areas and distractions. Desks should face away from windows and doors. Learners with autism benefit well from visual boundaries, and like I said, a visual timetable also works really well. So if you want to divide two parts of a room, you need to put like a bookshelf there, for example, so they know, okay, this side is for playing, this side is for academic work. And then they also need, very important, a quiet space where the learners can retreat cooling off area where they feel, okay, I'm reaching, my cup is almost full now, I need to cool myself for 10 minutes before I have a meltdown, and I can come back when I'm ready. Establishing structure and routine, like I mentioned earlier, this is really important for autistic kids. You cannot deviate from the routine, otherwise you'll lose them for the whole day. This refers to also how your time is used. Learners with autism have difficulty in predicting the sequence of events in a day. They become anxious if there are any changes made to their established routines. When events are difficult to predict or they're confusing, it causes them discomfort. A predictable routine needs to be established. The duration of the activity should look at the age of the learner and the ability. You can't expect a 2-year-old to obviously sit for 20 minutes and build a puzzle. That's just not going to happen. You also need to obviously look at the learner's strengths and needs. Activity should always end on a positive note, and this is very important. You need to make sure that if you've done a difficult activity, end with something that they enjoy so they still feel motivated to come back and do the same thing the next day. Transitions is very important for our children. Like I said, they don't like change in general. So you need to always warn them before you move from one activity to the next. You need to tell them by obviously saying there's 5 more minutes left, or what I like to do is use a timer and say, okay, when the timer goes off, we're going to stop doing English now and we're going to carry on with our maths activities. And like I say, obviously make it as visual as possible. Okay, use visual and concrete systems. So learners with autism require high levels of visual support. They're all visual learners. They learn through visual cues and teaching resources. Routines should be made visual by using pictures. They should be placed on a board for the learner to see, and then they can predict what's going to happen next. When giving instructions, use visual aids for the children that struggle. And then rules should also be presented visually in a classroom. And I always say, when in doubt, always go concrete. So if you're trying to tell a child something or teach them, even at home, if you're trying to give them a rule, for example, try and make it as concrete as possible. The learner always, if you present the activity in a concrete way, they're more likely to understand it before you go and do it in a 2D way. Providing systematic instruction, so learners with autism don't acquire information incidentally. Concepts and skills need to be directly taught. So systematic instruction is using a predictable presentation of materials. By doing so, the teacher is able to build on the learner's individual strengths. So if you do an activity, for example, you need to try and do it the same way every single time so that the child knows predictable what's expected of them. So for example, if I do maths with a child, there's some kids that use counters. So obviously I'll use counters with that child every single time. Accommodating sensory needs, which is very important. Learners with autism have difficulties in receiving, responding, modulating, and integrating social stimuli. The sensory stimuli can have a very hectic impact on the learner's ability to learn. Okay, so here it says learners need to be closely observed, and you'll notice if they need one of two things. So some learners will need the sensory stimuli to be reduced, which is majority of them, and some will need it to be increased. So for example, if a child sits closer to the TV once it's been turned up, obviously he needs more sensory stimuli. If a child blocks his ears when the volume's been turned up, obviously that needs to be reduced. Sorry, I'm nearly done. Strategies to enhance motivation to learn and facilitate engagement. So like I said, there's some kids that are passive and will just sit there and do nothing if you let them. So what you try and do is you have to try and bring their special interests into the classroom. So for example, I had a child that loved logos of a car. So if we did maths, I tried to incorporate that. English stuff, I tried to incorporate that to keep their attention and get them to interact with you. Then strategies to enhance socializations. Learners with autism find it difficult to recognize and interpret social cues. So teachers need to teach these skills on a one-on-one basis. So what I usually do is, a lot of our kids are exposed to mainstream children. I'll actually go physically with a group of 3 kids to a child and actually show them how to initiate play, take a ball and show them how they can initiate the game with them, how to respond to the game, and if the kids ask them questions, how they can respond to the children, and obviously to help them understand if they are frustrated, not to hit, not to kick, that's inappropriate, what you need to do. Then strategies for behavior management. The learner's behavior can have a significant impact on the classroom environment and extent to which learners can actively engage in teaching and learning. Learners should be provided with positive behavior support, and that involves developing a support behavior plan. Changes to the environment together with teaching skills can be successful in reducing challenging behaviors. So a lot of the time I have a positive, like a behavior chart, and obviously if a child does something right, they get a sticker, similar to what you would do in a mainstream classroom. If you get 5 stickers, you get an ice cream. They respond really well to that, or 5 minutes on an iPad, because they really enjoy technology. And then strategies to enhance communication. Like I said earlier, we use South African Sign Language, but there's also the Picture Exchange Communication System, or PECS, and Makaton. But our kids, they respond the most to sign language. So we use that in our classroom. And then, like I say, the most important when they start is to try and teach them things like toilets and the food, and then build on from that. Okay, and that's me for now.